I'm David Caputo, Professor of Political Science at Pace University in New York City, and I'd like to welcome you to the MOOC entitled The Road to the White House. Today's lecture is being taped the day of the New York primary. I'll have another lecture later this week, which will talk about the outcome of the election. This particular primary in New York State turns out to be more important than probably any primary in the last 30 years in New York State. It's especially important for the Democrats. Bernie Sanders has been put together an impressive string of caucus and primary wins since his loss in Wisconsin. He has also become more critical of Secretary Clinton, and Secretary Clinton has become more critical of him. And what you see now is a contest between two candidates that has become increasingly acrimonious. And one of the keys is that in the future, I think you're likely to see that it's going to be very difficult for either candidate to convince their supporters that they should support the other candidate. This could be very make for difficulties for the Democrats in the fall election. But we'll come back to that later. Today, however, I want to talk about the Democratic delegate projections. Those of you who saw the lecture on the Republican projections, I want to do something similar. Again, I'm using the 538 framework. Okay, there are very Politico, Time, the New York Times. They all have various projections, and all the numbers will vary a little bit. But let me give you some background in terms of what's important about the Democratic race. Remember that the Democrats have 4,763 delegates. Okay, more than double the number of delegates that the Republicans have. But of that 4,763, 712 are super delegates. These are delegates, largely office holders, members of the House, the Senate, and other significant leadership within the party, who are not elected. Okay? They're appointed by the Democratic National Committee. We know who they are. There's 712. Okay? Thus, you have only 4,051 delegates who are actually selected through the primary and caucus process. Okay? All right, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, let's go for just a minute. What 538 does is look at the candidates and where they are. So they're showing that this is of the 4,051 delegates. Okay? Of the delegates chosen so far, Clinton has 1,305 and Sanders has 1,099. So when you see these totals, you say, whoa, this is a very close race, that he's only 206 behind, and that is correct. Where it doesn't become close is when you add in the superdelegates. But let's leave the superdelegates out and look at this analysis, because I think it leads to some interesting things. They claim that Clinton has 107% of the target that she needs in order to get her majority. Don't worry about that so much. But let's go down and look here, a little further down in their analysis, where they talk about what the target is, and then they give you a summary, much like they did for the Republicans. But let's just start here with Connecticut. And you can see the numbers. So you see Pennsylvania is very important with 189, but Pennsylvania allocates their delegates a very strange way, so they're largely uncommitted. But here's the real prize, 475 delegates. Whichever candidate is able to run a large victory in California is in position to really pick up 100+ delegates over what their opponent has. So it's the math of the delegate selection process. Oh, one other one I want to point out to you down here at the very bottom, and that's 126 in New Jersey. Okay? So those are the largest states. Pennsylvania, California, and New Jersey are the largest states that are left. Now, let's look specifically at the Democratic analysis that I've put together for you. All right. So, as I mentioned, you need 2,382. There's out of the 4,763 delegates. 712 are superdelegates. Therefore, you have 4,051 delegates in play. Clinton has so far won 1,305, which is meaning that she's winning 54% of the delegates, and Sanders is winning at 46. Thus, there are 2,440 delegates that have been won, and 1,647 left. Only 1,647 of the delegates left. Okay. Now, let's assume that these percentages up here, the 54 and 46, stay the same. And I know you're going to say, oh, no, Clinton will do better or Sanders will do better, possibly. But let's just say they stay the same. Clinton would get 889 of the remaining 1647 and end up with 2,194 total. Sanders would get 758 of the remaining delegates for 1,857 total. So what's significant about that? Now we're done. We've allocated the 4,051 delegates. The problem is neither one is at the 2382 number. So where do they make that up? It comes from the superdelegates. The superdelegates in a preliminary poll done by the Associated Press and the polling that's been done since are about 80 to 85% supporting Secretary Clinton, which means that the superdelegates would put her over the top. Okay, so in essence, if the percentage of superdelegates switched to even 60-40 for Sanders, okay, it doesn't have to be 85, but 60-40 for Sanders, that would put him over the 2382. Okay, my point here is that the Democrats, as much as they don't want to admit it, are going to be faced with the fact that assuming that this plays out, as I have talked about, that the superdelegates, the party establishment, the party officials, are going to pick the candidate. Okay? This, I think, could create a lot of problems for them. It certainly will create a lot of problems if Sanders is not the person chosen. So what is the Sanders strategy? Continue to stay close, mount decisive victories in California, perhaps in New Jersey, and other states on June 7th, and go in and say, look, don't look at the entire process. Look at what's happened in the last half of the campaign. I'm clearly the front runner. I'm clearly the person you should support. This is going to put tremendous pressure on the superdelegates. Superdelegates, as out in Colorado, some of the delegates from Colorado are already getting pressure to support Sanders over Clinton, even though they've pledged to Clinton. And the argument is that, look, the state supports Sanders. You have an obligation to support. Some of the superdelegates have indicated they will support whoever their state supports, or whoever their state supported in the primary and caucuses. This would lead to an increase for Sanders. So even though Sanders is behind at this point, and he appears, and it's clear that he has enough money to go to the convention, this is going to be a heavily contested convention. And it's going to be wrought with a lot of emotion because the Sanders people and the Clinton people both feel very strongly. So I think one of the potential disasters for the Democrats is that they will have a very divisive convention, and that whoever is the winner will not be able to garner the support, if not of the other person, of the other candidate, but especially of the other person's supporters. And this creates a series of problems. So how does this change? How can this change so that either one of these could end up with enough delegates where the superdelegates don't matter, short of Senator Sanders or Senator Clinton withdrawing from the race in the next week? It's not going to happen. There is simply not enough delegates out here unless one of the two candidates began to win delegates at the rate of 80 to 20 or 90 to 10. And that's not going to happen because the Democratic proportional process would keep the number of delegates close unless you get a truly lopsided victory. So the Democrats are going to have a problem at their convention, even though the focus so far has been on the Republican convention on the part of the media. But I would point out to you, just follow this for my students in my class. Again, you know what the baselines are now. As we see different elections, different primary elections being held and so forth, see what the results are going to be. Now, how does this change? There's one other way, and that is that one or the other outperforms. Clearly, one just simply runs out of gas and tanks, or the other one simply excels to such a point that it becomes a really strong movement towards that candidate. Now, there's one other possibility, and this is certainly Senator Sanders has talked about this, and that is he's going to convince the superdelegates. He says he has confidence in the superdelegates that they will realize that he is a better candidate in the general election than Secretary Clinton. Okay? Now, that's a tough argument to make, but he's going to have on his side a much better showing, if it continues as it has, a much better showing in the late primaries. Her contention will be that she has more delegates, assuming that she does, and she probably will. And secondly, more votes. More people have voted for her. Sanders is going to argue that he has a broader coalition than Clinton does. So you can see right away how divisive this is going to be, how spirited it will be. And if history tells us anything, the Democrats do not do well when they leave a convention split and when they leave a convention without unity both on their platform and on the candidates. So watch for this as we go forward. I mentioned in the last video, and I want to mention it again, I'll be doing a MOOC this summer on the conventions. It'll start right around the 8th to the 10th of July and cover both conventions. I hope you'll join me for that. You can find it by going to Open Education at blackboard.com. And you'll see, go to PACE and you'll see it. We're just in the process of getting it together. And for the students who may want to take it for credit, it's going to be offered as we hope to have it offered as a 1-credit course, so stay tuned for that. All right, so there's one last point I want to make. There was some interesting research out this week in some of the public opinion polling, which you ask candidates if you have a positive or negative, favorable or unfavorable, yes, voters, I'm sorry, potential voters, if they have a favorable or unfavorable view of their candidates. And interestingly enough, John Kasich was the only one of the 3 Republicans and the 2 Democrats to have a positive, a net positive, meaning you subtract unfavorable from favorable. And he ended up, I believe it was either +9 or +12. Cruz is in the minus teens, I believe. But interestingly enough, Secretary Clinton, in the last 6 months, has seen her unfavorable ratings increase drastically. So the combination puts her at about, I believe, about -30. And Donald Trump is at -43. So that means 43% of the people have an unfavorable view of Trump, and in the 20s, have an unfavorable view of Mrs. Clinton. Now, I mention this because it appears, if things go forward as everyone is projecting, that the parties are going to nominate the 2 candidates who have the highest unfavorable at a time in which the American public have demanded and said they want change. What does this mean for American democracy, and what does it mean for the general election? We'll have more to talk about that in the next lecture. Thank you.